the AllThingsXR podcast. Where you can get the best AR/VR analyzers from the biggest names in the field. Hi everyone, welcome to the AllThingsXR podcast. I'm Mojtaba. In today's episode, we talk about the connection between AR and AI with our special guest, Shel Israel, one of the most well-known names and authors in AR/VR space. This episode was recorded about a month ago when Shel was in his previous company, Transformation Group. Recently, Shel published a post announcing his departure from Transformation Group and also about his future plans. You can find the link to his post on the description. Without further ado, let's get to the podcast. Hi Shel, thanks so much for joining the AllThingsXR podcast.
Hi Mojtaba, glad to be on the show. Thank you.
Sure, it's an honor to have you on the AllThingsXR podcast. I'm sure most of our listeners know you and your works, but for those who don't, can you tell us more about yourself and your company, Transformation Group?
Okay, that could take up the entire half hour, but I'll try to tell a long story quickly. I've spent half my life as a writer and half as a consultant. On the writing side, for a very long time, I've been writing about disruptive technology and how it will change primarily business, but also life and culture. I'm writing my 8th book now with Irina Cronin. My most recent book, and probably the best excuse for me being on your show, is The Fourth Transformation, which came out in the end of 2016. It's all about augmented reality, virtual reality, and mixed reality, which, for the sake of not taking half an hour saying that phrase, I'll just call either MR or immersive technology during the show.
Yeah. So.
Oh, the other half, I forgot. The other half is I am partners with Irina Cronin in Transformation Group, LLC. We provide education, analysis, research, writing, workshops to clients of all sizes on all on all continents, mostly about immersive technologies. Right now, it's almost always either about AR or artificial intelligence. And our clients range from two-person operations to global furniture retailers who we cannot name.
Great. So, as you mentioned, a few weeks ago, you announced your new book, AI Century. Can you tell us more about that and what was the initial idea for it?
Wow. You ask these short little questions that could take me 3 days to answer. The last book, the premise and the subtitle was how augmented reality and artificial intelligence change everything. And at that point, all we were really looking at was the impact AI was going to have when we all started wearing headsets and smart glasses. Everybody was writing and talking about what you could do, the experience you would have, the immersion and all that. And we were interested in the gathering of data. Mm-hmm. And as we got into it and as we realized that the transformation we're really facing is bigger, and I say bigger than just immersive technologies. That is not to say immersive technologies aren't a huge and extremely important subject. I very deeply believe that in a few years, the center of our digital life will be in headsets, not smartphones. But there is something more than that going on. It has to do with machines becoming as smart as humans and eventually smarter than humans, and how both the benefits, such as saving the planet we live on, are becoming more apparent, and the dangers, such as destroying the planet we live on, or humanity on the planet we live on, are all there. So that brought Irina and I together to really want to write a book that follows a pattern that's been around since I wrote Naked Conversations about why social media might just be good for business back in 2005. And that was take all the noises happening, all the stuff that's going on, organize it, and explain it in a way that is simple and useful to business thinkers. So far, we've written 1,200 words. That's the introduction. My editor hasn't yet rejected it, so we're on our way. Another 57,500 words, and I'll have a book.
Regarding your last two books with Robert Scoble, Age of Context, and one of my favorite books, The Fourth Transformation, those books were about context, as you mentioned, IoT, AI, and mostly AR. How do you think the predictions and analyses in those books are true today?
I think Age of Context set a stage for a new era. I think Transformation Group, written from the prism of 2016, was accurate in what we described, but overly optimistic about the speed of adoption. And I think that immersive technologies are going to transform the enterprise far faster than the consumer market, which was not in keeping with what we said in the book. I also think that if we had more time, we would have, but we needed to dig more into the gateway into AI. That what is happening, it's sort of, let's go to a book I did not write, which is how the smartphone would change our lives from the desktop computer. Mm-hmm. If I had written that book, I might have talked about some really eerie, exciting applications that you could do in movement. But what I might have missed is that there is an underpinning that changes global culture. The phone took the computer from our homes and put it into our pockets and purses. It became part of our life. It actually is the first step, the way I see it, into where AI is there, because our phones become part of us. Uh-huh. They know more about us than we do ourselves.
Exactly.
If they get a little smarter, they will be able to predict what we want, as AI started to do. And if we get an interface that is a little more intimate than tapping and sliding on the face of a computer, then we can put it in front of our faces and headsets, or eventually just transmit things through brainwaves, which, as you know, brain-computer interface is a place of astounding growth. It's a growth that I hadn't even considered. When we looked at what was around and started running a Fourth Transformation Group, we came across a couple of these brain-computer interface ideas in healthcare and defense. And wow, that was freaky, but it wasn't anything to do with everyday business. Mm-hmm. And now there must be 50 apps in BCI. The spilling over, there are companies like Emotive that are creating really promising stuff at really affordable prices. And I didn't think that would happen for another 5 years. And in this new book, we're definitely going to have a full chapter on brain computer interface. And I don't know about you, but to me, this hits a threshold of freakiness that is amazing because we're going to have machines that read our thoughts.
Yeah.
And supposedly help us. But while I think overwhelmingly that's what they will do, there are others that will collect the data of those mind-reading psychic machines. I grew up in a world where somebody in the future was usually a gypsy with a fishbowl turned upside down and looked into it to see the future. And it's changing. It's changing very, very fast.
Yeah, exactly. I think that will be the ultimate input. As Elon Musk says, we are currently very limited in our forms of input with our computers. We usually use mouse and keyboards or touch screens, but our brains can process way more input data, as our visual senses alone get terabytes of data per second, and we are very limited in our speed to interact with computers. And if we can interact with our brains, it will change our lives.
I believe so, yeah. It'll change our lives is the statement. Collectively, as a species, we are changing. Technology has profoundly changed human culture already, but we're going to a point where our machines are not going, I mean, in my lifetime, the beginning was, as I wrote in the Fourth Transformation, engineering scientists in the bowels of big Fortune 100 companies putting little holes in punch cards, and that's how we talked to computers. And we had timeshare, and people went into the basement at 3 a.m. because it's the only time they could get on the few computers that existed. And now we have our kids in junior high school using these devices that are many times smarter, orders of magnitude smarter than the mainframes of that era. And everything's happening faster, so that's a 50-year period.
Yeah.
The new book's talking about the AI century, and that's what we see. What's going to happen in the next 50 to 75 years? What's culture going to be like when we have machines who are our colleagues? These machines will be robots, but they may look so realistic that we don't realize they are. They may be our pets. They may be our children's caretakers. They may be our coworkers. They may be our lovers. That's where we're going. And, you mentioned Elon Musk. He's one of the two most famous naysayers or doomsday predictors of what could happen if all this stuff gets out of hand. And I consider Elon a few orders of magnitude smarter than me, and I bet you feel the same way about him. But
yeah.
I certainly hope he's wrong on this one, and I think he is. I think he's talking about worst-case scenarios.
Yeah.
And I think the history of the world is that whatever we do, whatever advance we have in technology, there are always bad side effects. We still drive, despite the fact that in America, where we're the world champions of killing each other with guns, we still kill more people with cars every year, yet we still drive.
Yeah.
And the unintended consequence of the future is we're making cars safer by taking idiots away from the steering wheels, and probably the rest of us away from the steering wheels as well. So I'm fascinated by how ones and O's in binary code change the essence of the human animal. And when I look backwards, I realize that's been going on all along. We're in the cave and somebody hits a spark and a flame starts, and we have fire. We want to tell a story, and somebody picks up some berry juice and starts smearing it on a cave wall, and we have storytelling.
Yeah.
But there's always a side effect. I mean, when we got boats that were good enough to go out away from the shores And into the oceans, we had sailors drowning for the first time, but that didn't stop us.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what's going to happen. For better or worse, we are going to go forward with all this stuff. Taking it to a higher road, and I know we have an awkward transition here because I've lost a train of thought.
Uh-huh.
I define, Arthur Clarke, a sci-fi writer, once said, man is the one creature that must go beyond. And of course, if he's alive now, he changed man to humans. But we can't stop going forward. Whatever we have done, we have to go further. And with every wave of this, the unintended consequences can be more disastrous than has been in the future. When we created social media, which is where I got started as a writer, as a champion of it, I never imagined a situation where American presidential politics would be sabotaged by Russian hackers. Mm-hmm. I never pictured lonely teenagers either committing suicide in front of video cameras or walking into high schools with assault weapons. Horrible, horrible things have happened because of social networks. On the other hand, look at the benefits to 2 billion members of the human race.
Exactly.
Look at how it's changed us. Look at how you and I are talking right now.
Exactly.
I mean, the fact that you and I, you're in Luxembourg, if I recall. I'm in California. We're using a product that is owned by Microsoft that they acquired from a group of hackers who were trying to outsmart Russian cybersecurity in Estonia 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Just think of that. Think of this journey that makes what you and I are doing right now close to free and ridiculously commonplace.
Exactly.
Now, think of the speed of change and go forward 10 more years. Where are we going to be? You know, devices, headsets, screens, will they be necessary at all? Will we now be able to have this conversation with people all over the world listening to us? And we're doing it by brainwaves and maybe a little earring that we clip onto the lobe of our ear. Mm-hmm. And we see each other as if we're sitting in the same room as holograms. And we give each other a hug or a fist bump and we feel it.
Yeah.
And this is not a miracle. This is the way it's going to be.
Exactly.
What does that mean to human culture? You know, you add on to that blockchain and AI, and you start saying, what do we need government for? And if we get government out of the way, maybe we're all going to get along a little bit better.
Exactly.
On the other hand, Elon Musk might jump into the conversation and say, no, the machines are going to look around and say the humans are too inefficient, so we're going to eliminate them.
Uh-huh.
Could happen, but I don't think so.
You know, he is more worried about the exponential speed of it and getting it will get out of control. But I'm like you, more with Eric Schmidt of Google, who says that he's wrong about these things, and there's nothing to worry, at least for the next decade. Well,
I think nothing to worry overstates the case. I think there's plenty of cause for worry. I think the issue right now with Facebook and fake news and everyday, I said fake news, but the use of human data, personal data, even if we adhere to the European standard, which I think is a foregone conclusion at this point, the bad guys are going to find ways to abuse it anyway. Mm-hmm. And it isn't going to stop. And we can't just forget about it, but we also cannot stop the nature of the human animal from using technology to evolve, to move forward, to go further, to discover new life forms, to discover new stars, to stop cancer. And I obviously get pretty passionate in this area.
Mm-hmm.
That's all the promise of this.
Yeah.
And we just need to pay attention to these side effects because they're very real.
Yeah, exactly. So, getting back to AR, actually, regarding AI, actually one of my favorite quotes about the relationship between IoT, AR, and AI, which I usually use in my presentations and conferences, is from your book with Robert, The Fourth Transformation, that says, quoting, "If the IoT is the nervous system of the fourth transformation technology, then AI is its very soul." And I think it is so true about the importance of AI in technologies like AR and VR, which we are working on. About your book, Age of Context, speaking of context, at the beginning of ARKit introduction and its hype, I wrote an article in VentureBeat addressing why ARKit and ARCore in their current form and without context won't take off, and why context will be critical in augmented reality. And they are still in that phase, I think. But what are your thoughts about context in AR, and what do you think are the biggest obstacles that keep AR from becoming truly mainstream?
I'll take those questions backwards. I think the barriers are that the technology, there's two parts to it.
Mm-hmm.
First, the technology is more complex than it appeared to be back then when we were first looking at it. We got into the developer's mistake of saying, all you got to do is create a neural network and a heuristic algorithm and blah, blah, blah. The second thing is that technology can never get ahead of what the everyday person is comfortable with.
Mm-hmm.
And moving from something you hold in your hand and tap to something that you put in your face, and I immediately think of the early Google Glass pushback thing, but you're going to put something on your face that is going to nauseate you a little, perhaps tether you, perhaps weigh as much as a pound, perhaps have sensors going over your skull. That's really foreign stuff to 22-year-old people whose center of their life is their work in a clothing store, rather than people like you and I who are immersed in technology itself and have we have a certain love for technology as technology. You and I have never met, but we have a common ground, which is we have been looking at the same things for a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
We may agree or disagree on politics, but that's a little bit aside from the point. The point is that we both have a passion for what AR and AI can do for the world, for our work, for our family, for the people we love.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing. I'm legendarily old. I think I'll be non-transparent and leave it out. But at my age, very many people are starting to lose memory, lose focus, show signs of old age and dementia. And then I read about a company, I'm forgetting the name of a Swiss company with over $1 billion in investment, who's working on see, now I'm showing a lack of memory. I should be able to name the company. But they have a headset and they're curing diseases of old age, or treating the diseases of old age on the way to curing the diseases of old age.
Uh-huh.
And they have this very expensive headset, and it's something you wouldn't dare wear. But maybe by the time that I have to worry about such things, maybe 10 years from today, that'll just look a little bit like the glasses I'm wearing right now. And when my memory has a gap, it'll hit the right thing, and there'll be a little electric spark from one synapse to another, and I'll remember.
So, Shel, another question about today's state of AR. So recently, big players show more and more interest in AR. And I think it is right to say we all think that AR will be the next big thing. What do you think about these players like Google, Apple, Facebook entering the space? How you evaluate them? And who do you think has the best chance?
You like to ask questions that take 2 or 3 days to answer again.
We are here to listen.
Okay, let's limit the conversation to the big 5 companies who are the 5 Western companies most likely to be dominant players over the next 10 years. Mm-hmm. And that's important because I think China could end up being a much bigger player than either the EU players or the US players.
Yeah, that's possible.
Yeah, and I'll say Western players because Canada is actually doing a lot in this area right now. I don't think South America is. But Microsoft has enormous benefits of they're the installed base in the enterprise. Mm-hmm. They're the safe company the way 20 years ago IBM was. So when they make an announcement, the technologists go, what's the big deal about SharePoint taking AR into the enterprise? I look at it and say, wait a minute, they have 400,000 corporate customers, most of them large companies. That means as they come in, they are going to have AR headsets using SharePoint, which isn't the coolest of technologies that we know of. But there's going to be millions of people using it in a couple of years. So they have that position. They also have become a very forward-thinking, enlightening company. They need to figure out their connection with the user and not the corporate customer a little better, but they're headed in the right direction. So they have enormous assets. Now, then there's Amazon, whose friendly little Alexa knows what we buy.
Yeah.
And if I know what you buy, I know all about you. I know your habits. I know your vices. I know when you sleep and don't sleep.
Yeah.
I know all kinds of things about you.
Exactly.
Then there's Facebook, which is gathering data constantly all over the place and does, on its virtuous side, seem to find technology that people love so much that when we're outraged by Facebook's behavior, we go to Facebook to tell others about it, which to me is one of the great riddles of our time and cannot be counted out. 2 years ago at F8, Zuckerberg stood on the stage, and I think it was slide 32. Yeah, I'm cheating because this was in the book, The Fourth Transformation. But on slide 28, he turned around and said, this is the future. And there was a big screen of a pair of eyeglasses that looked very much like the pair that I wear.
Exactly, I remember that.
Yeah, and it was going to have MR and AR and VR in it. You wouldn't be able, it wouldn't light up, it wouldn't look any odder than any other headset, which everyday people wear all the time. And it was going to cost a couple of $100. And I think that vision is very accurate, but it is one of the ways I thought the fourth transformation was overly optimistic, because that isn't going to happen in 2020-21. It's going to happen closer to 2025. It's just too hard to make it. I mean, when I was looking at those headsets or those eyeglasses, it didn't dawn on me just the issue of battery heat was a barrier that has to be overcome, and it's been a barrier ever since we started using batteries in portable computers. So I think I'm getting a little off track. Then you look at Google, which I think is the furthest ahead in AI And of those 5 companies is certainly on top tier with headsets, at least what I understand they will be coming out with. They are also a company that in this time of trust has remained the most trustworthy in a lot of ways and has the most data on each of us. It collects even more data by several, I think 5 times the data that Facebook does. I could be off on that stat, but it's a lot more. And yet it's had no great scandals. I mean, if there's something scandalous, it was that people like me thought that their first serious try with Lenovo, I'm forgetting even the name now, was going to be better and get consumers in shopping to want to wear headsets or use handsets to go shopping long before it would happen. But I don't think any one of these companies can be taken out of the equation. Did I leave somebody out? Oh, how could I have left out Apple?
With this week's WWDC.
Yeah, I think that Apple, long the most elegant product provider in the world, long a champion of privacy because they don't sell advertising, they sell products, making them business models different. I think Apple is the one that has really lost its way. And I think that they're heading toward making more money as a services company than as a product company. The rumor is very strong and very consistent that in 2020 or 21, they're going to come out with an MR headset.
Yeah.
It's going to be affordable. It's going to be treated as a replacement for the iPhone X, which already needs replacing, if you ask me, but we won't go there today. I think that Apple will either succeed then to once again leapfrog ahead of everybody, as it did with the iPhone, as it did with the Mac, or it's going to become the laggard of this group of 5 companies that you mentioned.
Great. So
on the other hand, I just wanted to add one thing. Having these 5 powerhouses hell-bent on beating each other to market is driving this AR/AI revolution further and faster than it possibly would have gone if any one of them was not a player. Yet it's lagging far behind the timeline that Robert Scoble and I saw when we wrote The Fourth Transformation. That's what I wanted to say.
Great. So mentioning these big names, do you think there are any dangers that any one of them will have a monopoly, and will our privacy be in more danger than it is today as we adopt technologies like AR glasses?
Not in my lifetime. All of these companies, that's why I dwelled on their assets, all of these companies have really powerful assets and really loyal customer bases. Each of them has a different business model, which I find really interesting. It's not like the old days where Microsoft, I don't even remember the WordPress, Ashton Tate, that was which one will win, Lotus, and one had to win because they all had the business models. They were all after the knowledge workers, and they're all trying to do the same thing better than the other. This case, you have 5 companies who have essential different business models, different cultures, different technological advantages, and billions and billions and billions of dollars in their war chests. So I don't think any one of them is going to go away. And I think each one of them is going to force the other to keep moving. I think the really big question is what happens when the Chinese companies start going global. That's a big question.
Yeah.
What happens when China gets a hold of our data is bad enough when the United States does, but what happens then? I don't know.
Yeah, that's the question. So regarding the big players like Facebook, Apple, Google, Microsoft, Snapchat, etc., do you think that startups still has a chance in this space?
Well, let me take a shot at what you just said. I wouldn't put Snapchat up there. I'm not sure Snapchat's a finalist. Snapchat has been a very interesting and innovative player, but I don't see what is infallible in the near future. I think Snapchat is a defeatable company. And the answer to your next question is absolutely. There are huge opportunities for startups to come along. And maybe being old, I remember too much. I remember when Google didn't have a chance because it was too late into the startup game. And when Facebook was discounted as just being a place for Ivy League frat boys to get dates on Friday nights. There is always an opportunity for a startup. It usually comes from someone young who has no respect for their elders, who looks around and says what Steve Jobs said on stage so many times: everything else is just crap. And then proves that they're right by doing something which is different and better. There's also the generational thing. In America, for many years, the ultimate luxury car was the Cadillac. The image of the Cadillac was rich old white men smoking cigars. So anyone who wasn't a rich old white man discovered other cool luxury cars like the Porsche, like the Ferrari, Mercedes. And the world changes. That's where culture and business sometimes overlook each other. But because as I grew up, Microsoft was the bad guy, and millennials have no recollection of that ever being the case. At some point, Apple becomes. Someone I know who is 14 looked at my iPhone and said, "That's a phone for rich old men." And I asked him if he could spell disinheritance because he is a member of my family. But it tells me a great deal about how, for me, Apple was the technology for the rest of us. It was the counterculture. It was the computer for hippies, artists, architects, designers, artistic people. It wasn't for those knowledge workers who went in and did spreadsheets.
Exactly.
So what is young and hip does get old and out of date. It's Michael Dell in a dorm room beating out Compaq. I'm probably telling stories many of you audiences don't know, but there is always the opportunity for the entrepreneur. There are people listening to this program right now who just don't fit into corporate cultures as they exist today.
Exactly.
But they have friends and they know how to code, and they got into this not by getting MBAs at prestigious schools, but by zapping aliens in games.
Exactly.
And they have every opportunity in the world to change the world.
Exactly. Great. I hope so. So, Shel, when do you think AR will be truly mainstream, and when will be the iPhone moment of AR? Geez,
you got a book in front of you that gave you the answers to those questions, and I've already proven to be wrong. I think that the evolution of AR it's going to go back a whole generation of history where tech began in the enterprise and moved to the consumer. I think that AR on the phone is a transitional technology. It's just one thing, it's not immersive. For another, is it's not hands-free. And for another, it's not even that interesting, at least for me and most of the people I speak to, for a while. So if I had to give you a crossover year, not for AR, but for headsets, it would be around 2023 to 2025. I think that the refinement is happening in the weirdest of places, like warehouses where order picking is being used, where they've been using AR on handsets for years to fulfill orders with greater accuracy, and now they're moving to headsets. I think that the fact that headsets don't look exactly like something you want to be seen walking into a working man's tavern with right now doesn't matter when you're using it to load heavy freight onto the back of a truck. And so the real question is, when does it move from enterprise apps to consumer apps? And I think the transition will go from enterprise to retail, from retail into home. I think by the year 2025, children will be using headsets in the classroom, whether that's like every student having their own headset, and it doesn't matter quite what brand because we all have standards or not. But the slowers are things like what I just said. You're going to need standards so that everybody can get their own brand of headset and there's no monopoly. And no one's even working on that. No one's even thinking about that. I give speeches, and at the end of them, people say, what headset should I buy for my enterprise? And I said, well, that depends. And then I have to talk about AR Lite, and AR, and mixed reality, and Microsoft's definition of mixed reality versus mine. And it's got to simplify, and that is one of the great barriers that no one's talking about. When it's like walking into an Orange store in Europe or a Verizon store in America, and you have three choices, and all three of them essentially do what you want. The software is different, the face is different, so you got personalization going on, but they work the same. And if you want to see a talking wine level, you can do it on an Android phone or an Apple phone. And until then, it's going to be a slower adoption than Robert and I envisioned back in 2016. So I guess if you pin me down, which you haven't done, I'll go for 2025. 2025.
I hope so. Great. So
well, I was hoping for 2021, but
no, it's not that far.
Well, 100 years from now, they'll look back and say Israel and Scoble, they were within a few years. Right now, 4 years is an eternity, and we missed it by 4 years.
Well, thank you very much, Shel, for joining the AllThingsXR podcast. It was an honor.
It was a pleasure. Take care.